Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome, and today I have a truly fascinating and informative guest joining me, who's going to shed light on a topic that's crucial for every single one of us, whether we know it or not. And that is women's immune system health. When I got diagnosed with burnout nearly a decade ago, I became fiercely curious about how it had happened. I'd been living the healthiest I had for years. So how did it happen? That was the question I kept coming back to. And that experience took me really on a quest to understand the factors that had contributed to it. And there were some really shocking revelations along the way, including how medication I'd been given over 25 years previously may have contributed to the downfall in my health, damaging my immune system along the way. So when I read a post that my guest today wrote on social media a little while ago about women's health, immunity, and mental cycles, and the contraceptive pill, it spoke to the heart of my health issues, and I knew I had to reach out to invite her to share her powerful insights here. And I'm really grateful that she said yes, and she's joining us. And I think you're going to be blown away by what she's got to share. My guest is Dr. Jenna Macciochi, a renowned expert in the field of immunology and women's health. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and a passionate advocate for understanding and optimizing our immune systems. Her groundbreaking research and insights have not only advanced our understanding of how women's immune systems function, but have also provided practical strategies to help us to thrive in our daily lives. Dr. Jenna is a mother of twins and a keen home cook, creating recipes and rituals inspired by her farm-to-table Scottish roots and capturing her family's Italian heritage. And I think you're going to love Dr. Jenna's down-to-earth and really accessible insights and approach to life. So whether you're trying to stay healthy amidst the challenges of modern life, or you simply want to gain a deeper understanding of how your body functions, this episode is jam-packed with valuable information you don't want to miss. I think you're going to love what Dr. Jenna's going to say, and I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let's dive in and welcome her. So welcome, Jenna. Thank you so much for joining me. For those that don't yet know about you and your work, would you mind just sharing a bit about who you are, the work that you do, and how you came to do that work?
Yeah, good place to start. I'm not really sure how to answer that in the most concise way, but I'll try. I'm an immunologist, and some people may not have heard of that term before, but it's basically someone who works on and studies and tries to understand everything about the immune system. And I kind of serendipitously fell into this field when I was younger. I was thinking about what to do with my life when I left school, and just had this fascination about the human body and health and disease. And immunology just seemed to answer those questions, or at least try to answer those questions somewhat. And I just had some really great mentors early on, and I fell in love with this subject area. And so I've kind of weaved a career around it ever since. The immune system is really fascinating, as hopefully we can share in our conversation today. And it's meant that I've got to work in all different areas, from infectious diseases to allergies and autoimmune disease and gut health. It really is the system that sort of weaves into all aspects of our well-being, both physical and mental. And that's, one of the reasons that I find it so fascinating.
Yeah, and I love following you on social media. And I know that at the end of this interview, we'll share all your links. But I would encourage people to follow you, because I've learned so much from the posts that you do. So thank you for the time and energy that you put into those, because there is so much rich source of information in there, because you really educate as well as kind of inspire. So yeah, I can't wait to dive into this conversation. So obviously today we're talking about the subject of immunity. Can you explain what is meant by that, and also kind of what is meant by our immune system?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. And it is a confusing system. So please, for people listening, don't worry if, you can't quite think what is your immune system, because it's not really one thing. And it's unlike other body systems, it's not really in one place. Like we can all imagine where our digestive system is. We know about our brain and our nervous system, and we can imagine the spinal cord, but the immune system's kind of everywhere. And it's made up of the white blood cells. Now, these are not just in the blood, even though the name suggests that. They're found all over the and it's also organs. So things like our bone marrow, our lymph nodes, our spleen, the tonsils, these are all parts of our immune system. And then the whole digestive tract and the airways, because these are places where we could be exposed to germs and things that could cause us harm. So these are part of our immune system. And even things like our skin. So that's, the main barrier to stop things on the outside getting into our body. And then we have the gut microbiota, or any microbiota across the body. So the collection of microbes that inhabit us. These are part of our immune defenses because they help fortify those areas and act as a barrier against things that we don't want to get in. And we tend to think about the immune system as just the thing that stops us getting infections or helps us heal when we do get an infection. But its role is much more broad than that. It's really preventing anything untoward getting into your body, but it's also involved in healing and repair. So, if you break a bone and there's no infection, but those tissues are damaged, the bone is damaged, it's your immune system that's healing and repairing that. The inflammatory response of the immune system is what gives us a fever, makes us feel unwell. And there's, pregnancy has a really important role for the immune system and in that barrier between the developing baby and the mother, because the baby is genetically different to the mother. So the immune system kind of negotiates that we're going to let this baby grow, even though normally we're designed to remove things that are foreign from our body. So there's all different roles. And, we've really started to open up around the interaction between the brain and the immune system. And there's this whole field called psychoneuroimmunology, which is looking at the role of the immune system in mental health disorders and things like cognitive decline, things like clinical depression. So it really weaves into every aspect of our well-being.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because it just shows how complex this is. And as you say, some of the misconceptions that can come around it just being about the white blood cells, or it's just about kind of, that infection kind of part. And your mantra on social media is that there's no health without immune health. And I love that. Can you share what you mean by that, though?
Yeah, I think because it's emerged from research that the immune system is much more than, protecting us in winter from those seasonal colds and flus, that it does have such a governing role on every aspect of our well-being, from, things like how long we live to how well we recover from exercise to, how good our mental health is, that, we need to really think about the system and care for it so that it's going to care for us, and make sure that we lower the risk of not just catching a cold in winter, but also, the allergies, autoimmune diseases, mental health conditions, all these other inflammatory conditions that, are growing in, modern life.
Brilliant. Thank you. And how this interview came about, I'd said to you before we hit record that I've probably been following your work for about 5 years, pre-COVID, pre you writing your first book, and I've loved your work. But it was a particular post that you wrote where I was like, I've got to reach out to Jenna and ask her to come on and have this conversation. And it was a post about gender biases and particularly sexual dimorphism, is it? That's prevalent in the area of immunity. And I was like, oh my God, this is speaking to her so much to my experience of my own health. Would you kind of give some insights into that and speak to that, if you don't mind?
Yeah. I that was maybe a couple of months ago, the post on sexual dimorphism, and I've taken more of a deep dive into this in my first book, if people are interested. But I think it's been known in the research for a really long time, but for some reason it's not something that's widely known, and it should be, and particularly within the medical profession it needs to be more considered, because the way the immune system operates between males and females is really quite different, and that's down to a lot of different things. we have the sort of XY chromosomes where some of the immune system genes are, and obviously females have an XX chromosome. And so that means genetically, the way the immune system is going to work is just going to be slightly different. But then we have, this landscape of hormones, which is very different between men and women. And all of your immune cells, these white blood cells, have receptors on their surface for the different sex hormones. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and all the others. But those are sort of primary ones that have been studied in this context. And this means that the ebbs and flows of these hormones across the lifespan are shaping how the immune system is functioning. And so for women, that's going to be much more dramatic than for men, because once we get to that onset of menstruation in the teens, you suddenly have this monthly cycle where you have these ebbs and flows between progesterone and estrogen that are going to influence how your immune system functions, influence levels of inflammation in the body. And it means that point from ovulation until menstruation, women might experience more inflammatory symptoms of aching joints or feeling a bit run down, or even being more susceptible to picking up a cold or flu, if they're around lots of people, lots of germs. And so it's really quite stark, these differences. And one thing that I think is most profound is that when we look at autoimmune diseases, and these are conditions that your immune system has become dysregulated and starts attacking your own body. And so there's a central immune deregulation going on, and that would manifest as one or other type of autoimmune conditions, like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, or, there's so many. 80% of those autoimmune conditions are found in women. I mean, just that statistic would make you think, well, we have to look at why that is. And it's not just down to this influence of the immune system, but there are, there's obviously other social factors and things like that. But it's quite striking. It also means that generally women are better at dealing with minor infections like colds and flus. So the whole idea of man flu being a real thing has actually been shown by science. Men are typically not as good at coping with infections. The immune system is not as fast to react and respond. They tend to get sicker for longer. Women tend to be better at dealing with infections. Our immune systems are much faster and more efficient at getting rid of that. But the downside is that for some reason, this seems to tip over into this autoimmune phenotype where we're more susceptible to autoimmune diseases.
Which is, I find absolutely fascinating, because part of my own health journey has been non-specific autoimmune system problems. And so when you did a post about actually the menstrual cycle and how the contraceptive pill can influence this, it kind of joined the dots to the journey that I've gone on to almost be forensic about, well, how has this happened? What is going on in my body? What have been the influencing factors? And when I saw that post that you wrote about that, I was like, oh my God, the work that you're doing in this space is really, really powerful. So can you share a bit more about that in terms of the contraceptive pill, how that might influence it if people may have been on the contraceptive pill at some point in their life?
Yeah, and again, this is just something that's been completely overlooked in the research. And I don't want to scare anyone who has taken the contraceptive pill or is on the contraceptive pill. I think that if we look in history, the contraceptive pill has been very instrumental in some positive things around how women could function in society, but nobody stopped to think that giving these hormones to women, and that usually, it's given in when you're young and you're on it for several decades, nobody really stopped to think, is there some sort of side effect of that? And because we know these hormones are directly affecting our immune cells, nobody sort of looked into like what might be happening there. And so the research body on this particular aspect is quite small, but we do know that hormonal contraceptives have been linked to an increased risk of autoimmune diseases. And it's not saying that contraceptives will 100% lead you to get an autoimmune disease, because the causes of autoimmune diseases are complex and multifactorial. But we do know that sex hormones can play a role. And we know that oral contraceptives containing synthetic sex hormones can result in changes to the immune system that might be linked to autoimmune type symptoms. So as a sort of consequence of that. And it's, again, not to say that would happen in every individual, because every individual is different. But I just think it's something to be really cognizant of, especially as I get older and I have, friends with sort of daughters who are becoming in the teenage years. And sometimes, they have difficult menstrual cycles, or they have sort of hormonal acne, and the sort of reaction is always to just put them on contraceptive pill to sort that out. And it's kind of masking, because it might well sort out that symptom, the periods might settle, the other hormonal symptoms might settle. But is there another way that we could maybe figure out ways to improve those symptoms, and reserve the contraceptive pill for if they want to use it for contraception, and just discuss other options, and maybe do a little bit more to dig around why they're getting these hormonal symptoms. I think just we need to ask that question. And I get quite a lot of heat on social media when I talk about this. So, but I just think, what's wrong with having a conversation about that,
And I thank you for leaning into that conversation, because I can hear you're kind of reticent about, actually, you don't want to demonize a contraceptive pill, but equally raising awareness of this, because my own experience was when I started my periods very young, I was kind of 11, I think I was about 10 or 11, I ended up with what was the symptoms we now know of polycystic ovarian syndrome. And initially, because of the acne, I was put on long-term antibiotics. I was put on tetracycline for probably 2 or 3 years at that age. Then I was given the contraceptive pill at 12 or 13, and was on that until my mum died of breast cancer at 58. And the doctor kind of went, might be kind of worth you coming off that. And actually, a lot of my health issues in my 30s and 40s can track back to, as you say, it's multifactorial. It's not it's not a straight line, but yeah, that is part of the equation. And I'm like, I'd not heard anybody talking about this until I saw your work. So thank you for doing it and leaning into it.
Yeah, I know, it's tricky because these things are multifactorial, but if we can at least understand one of these risk factors and maybe then question whether that's something we need, because like a lot of women, we go on the pill and we don't question it, and then we stay on it for decades, and it's only when maybe there's some kind of life event that we think, oh, whereas if that there is a possibility to take away that risk factor by maybe there's other options instead of the pill, then that's a conversation worth having, I think. And I'd love to see more research in this area, but sadly, like, these sort of women's health issues are quite understudied. And autoimmune diseases are growing in prevalence. So it's something that we do need to work on, because autoimmune diseases are lifelong chronic conditions that require serious management, sometimes some really unpleasant drugs to get them under control. And so we do need to look at these sort of risk factors and root causes. And it generally, I think of the immune system as a sensing system. It's looking for inputs from our environment, our diet, our lifestyle, and piecing these all together, and then that will help it decide how to react. And when it's not getting all these inputs, because modern life brings a lot of negative things that are not helpful for that kind of overall immune balance, then that's when we see this rising tide of things like allergies and autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, no, completely get that. So I'm imagining people are listening going, this is absolutely fascinating. And also I'm imagining them going, so what can I do? Like, what are the factors that are in my control and influence that I can focus on? And we know that my audience are busy working mums that are often they're overwhelmed already and feeling stressed. But I know you're a working mum yourself. You've got twins. You've got a very full and busy life. I'm wondering if you can share, obviously, your experience as an expertise as a professional, but also if you would share some of the insights from you personally about what you've learned in your life works.
Yeah, I think I always try and do everything with a lot of compassion, because as a working mum, part of my journey in sharing the content that I do online was kind of trying to hold myself accountable as well. Like, if I have the knowledge, why am I not applying it to myself? And it's the same barriers that a lot of people listening will have. It's the time, it's just sometimes feeling drained from being pulled in a lot of directions, and making big changes to your overall diet and lifestyle can feel really, really overwhelming. And a lot of what I did around my second book was just, how do we get the aggregation of marginal gains? So all the little things that we can do that will over time build up to be quite impactful. And I think about, everybody has their kind of Achilles heel. So for me, it was sleep. And my twins were born premature, which quite often happens with twins. And obviously, when they're very small, I didn't get a lot of sleep, because that's kind of just the territory that you have with very small kids. But what happened was, as they got older and they started to sleep through the night, my sleep never returned. And I had a kind of hypervigilance from that. That you wait all this time to have a baby when you're pregnant, and then they're born into the world too early, and they're spending weeks and weeks in the intensive care unit, and it's kind of just not the start that you expect. And then suddenly they're okay to go home, and after spending all that time with them all hooked up to machines and wires, you're just told, oh yeah, you can take them home. And I had this like hypervigilance about them just stopping breathing, or something would happen, and I would be awake in the night and wouldn't be able to sleep even though my kids were sleeping. And this went on for many, many, many years, until I just got myself really ill, and it was purely down to like the stress and sleep connection. And so it's like, what's your Achilles heel? If you looked at what I was eating and exercising, I was doing all the right things, but I ended up with pneumonia, actually, because I caught a cold, and I was so run down that I couldn't fight off that cold. And I didn't stop. I just kept going to work, doing all the things we do as mums, until one day I couldn't get out of bed. And that was much worse, because then I had 3 weeks off work instead of 1 day off work. And that, all the sort of stuff that goes along with trying to organize around that for my colleagues to pick up things. And so I always say to people, like, find your Achilles heel. If you know that it's like sleep is something that you're struggling with, then just focus on that for now. And once you're sleeping better, you are waking up much clearer headed, feeling like you can take on the day, feeling like you can prepare yourself something more nutritious for lunch than whatever you're having normally, that you've got more capacity to deal with the emotions of your kids when they come home from school, like this sort of domino effect. And if it's something like eating, and you know that you've got yourself in some really bad habits with your diet, then take just that one thing and try and just work one meal at a time, bringing in some small positive changes. Because ultimately with the immune system, it's, I see it a lot online that people really want to be like, take these 3 supplements, eat these 5 foods, and that's all you need to do. And I think I wanted to know that too when I started out in this journey of communicating immunology and writing books on it. I wanted to find the secret, like, what's the 5 things? And I realized that there wasn't 5 things. There's like 5,000 things. And it's about doing as many of them as you can consistently. And it's, it is eating well, sleeping well, moving well, managing the stress, that connection with yourself and your mental well-being. And then it's getting outside and spending time in nature. It's supplementing where appropriate to supplement any gaps in your diet, but not in spite of, your diet. It's working on your gut microbiome. So it's a lot of different things. And when you lay that out, you think, oh God, it's so overwhelming, but let's just take one at a time and then map it out. And I think about the example of, something simple like brushing your teeth is such a habit that we almost do it without thinking about it. But when my kids were small and I started trying to teach them how to brush their teeth, like, it's effort every night to remind them. It's not like second nature to them. It's a brand new habit, and you've got to get through that sticky period until it's becoming second nature, and then they just do it by themselves, and they don't need to be reminded. And and so it's, if you think about that in any new habit that you want to start, whether it's like just cutting out that afternoon like sugar high, or doing a little bit more exercise, or getting more steps, it's going to feel really sticky in the beginning. Oh, it's just hard to change. It feels really uncomfortable to fit that into the routine. But if you just keep pushing through that short-term period, it becomes a habit. It becomes part of you, and at that point, it's much more smooth. And I find this example, which is from research into weight loss, and I don't normally talk about weight loss, but it was about people who were overweight and who had lost weight and successfully kept the weight off for a long term. And they were trying to figure out what was the reason that allowed these people to keep the weight off for the long term. And one of the biggest reasons that stood out was that the people said the way they lived their life with their diet and exercise became part of their life. It just became who they were. They embodied it. They embraced it. It no longer felt like a chore. They just felt part of their life. And I think that's applicable in other aspects of those healthy behaviors that we're all trying to strive for. It just embody it, make it who you are. That's something you do every day, like brushing your teeth. And I think that's a really, really useful way to look at it, rather than I'm going to, chastise myself for 6 weeks on this, health mission that's unsustainable. It's like, no, I'm just going to work on a couple of really small habits. And you know what, in 3 months' time, I'll just be doing them so automatically that I'll then choose another couple of habits to build into that. And in a year's time, I'll have really changed how things look for me.
I love that. There's so much goodness in there, Jenna. I think firstly, you just sharing your journey, that actually, even though you've got the knowledge, it doesn't mean that we do it perfectly. And you really understand the challenges and barriers that stop people from doing what we know is going to support us. And yeah, knowing that there are so many influencing factors, but not trying to do them all. As you say, pick your Achilles heel. And that piece about, it becoming an identity rather than just a behavior or relying on willpower, to actually, it becomes your identity and it gets integrated into your life. It's just who you are and what you do. And I think there's so much goodness in there. And I can't recommend people do this enough, is follow you on Instagram, because what you do is you share amazing recipes and ideas for food. You also share your own like movement practice, and it's not just about exercise, as you say, it's about movement and how important that is for our immune health. And all these, I always get like nuggets from you about that. But I'm just curious about the piece about sleep, because I can really relate to that. My son, my firstborn, was in and out of hospital the first year of his life, and that hypervigilance, and actually recognizing that I became a high functioning person with anxiety and didn't realize it. It was just that just became my norm. And I'm wondering, what was it you did that helped you recover from that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because something that I've posted about on Instagram quite a lot is if you have a real sleep issue, it's not going to be solved by sleep hygiene protocols that you find online. And in fact, they might make it worse, because sleep hygiene is important, and there's lots of science around, like, having a dark, cool room that's not cluttered, getting off your phone a few hours before you go to bed, not eating late at night, going to bed at the same time every day, getting morning sunlight. Like, these are all necessary inputs for a good night's sleep, but they're not sufficient if you have sleep issues. And actually, when I was exploring this myself, I found that the majority of people with sleep issues are coming from a psychological place. So it's not because their room was the wrong temperature, or they sat on their phone until the minute before they went to bed, scrolling Twitter or whatever. It's because their nervous system is somehow switched on. And it's like a plane doesn't drop out the sky when it lands. It comes down to land gently. And so I think having a really strong evening routine is really useful. We do that as mothers for our kids. I'm sure a lot of people can relate, but the effort and energy we put into that evening routine when our kids are really small is huge. And that slowly over time like allows our kids to anchor into that. And so we do need to treat ourselves the same way. There is negatives from looking on our phone, and I have a really strong phone curfew, but not so much because of the blue light and the effects on my melatonin production, but more because I'm probably, if I'm scrolling my phone at 9-10 o'clock at night, I'm probably looking at stuff that's not good for my brain. It's going to be making me think, or I've checked a work email and suddenly now my brain is spiraling about how to respond or what I need to do the next day. Or I've just saw some, horrific news story or read a thread online about, people arguing over something. It's probably not the type of content that's helping my nervous system come down gently. And so I've explored a lot of things, and I do think it's a very personal journey into, connecting with why you have that struggle with sleep. And I think it took a long time before I suddenly made the connection between the circumstances of my kid's birth and the situation with this sort of waking in the night, thinking I could hear them crying and then not being able to go back to sleep, even though they were completely sound asleep and hadn't woken up at all. And that awareness was sort of unlocking something. And then the second part was I started to do a lot of like breath work. I found it was sort of the only way that I could really bring my nervous system down. I think meditation's a really useful modality, but meditation, you almost need coaching, you need a teacher, you need the consistency. It's quite hard at the beginning, whereas just realizing that my breath can be automatic or I can take control of it. And there's like little breath work protocols that we know can send a signal to your nervous system that you're really calm, and that can help sort of bring down that nervous anxiety that can sort of rise up in the middle of the night. And that's been really useful. I sometimes listen to things in my headphones, sort of just little kind of calming meditations and things in the middle of the night. And I also accept that I will have bad periods of sleep again. It's something I found quite interesting to think about was, my husband has never had sleep problems, but he's had bad nights of sleep, but he just kind of brushes it off. Whereas if you've had insomnia or any kind of sleep problem, you almost scrutinize your sleep to such a degree that you don't know what's normal anymore. And I think just letting go of that is quite important. And knowing, okay, I'm in a really good sleep phase, then I have a difficult period at work or there's something going on at home, and then the bad sleep starts to flare up again, and just saying, okay, that's a sign that, I've got the tools to work on this to get things back to where they should be. And instead of seeing it as a negative spiral, it's like, oh, this is telling me something, this is information. And now I know what sort of levers to pull to get back to where I need to be.
And thank you again for sharing that, because I think, again, people can fall into the misconception that our immune system is about the supplements, is about just our microbiome. And what I'm hearing you say there is that psychological piece about regulating our nervous systems is so important as well, and really paying attention to what's going on for your nervous system and what for you is going to kind of downregulate it and get you into that kind of rest and digest place that can help soothe you. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. So we've covered so much, but I'm just wondering if there was just one thing you would hope people listening to this conversation would take away. What is it that you want people to know or hear?
That there isn't a quick fix, but there is a lot that you can do. And I think something that I found really surprising when I was researching my second book was that there's actual data, like empirical data, looking at how well your immune system is working and the effect of people being taught self-compassion techniques, being more compassionate to yourself and realizing that that's really important for our health, like our physical health. You can actually measure changes in your blood when you're more compassionate to yourself. I just think as mums, like, we give a lot of compassion out and we're often really, really hard on ourselves. And, maybe there's something in that's one of the missing links that is in society in terms of our immune health.
Oh, that's so powerful. That's a whole conversation in itself. And I love that because I did some training with Dr. Paul Gilbert, who does compassion focused therapy. And that was the first time that I was introduced to the vagus nerve. And I was like, oh my God, why have I not heard this before? And like just the whole impact that has on the body. And yes, I love that you've said that, because as you say, we are so hard on ourselves. And I think we are probably in history's most intensive form of mothering and parenting, where there are so many expectations, and just turning that compassion on ourselves can be so powerful. I know people are going to want to find out more about you and your work. So could you point us in the direction? I'll put all the links into the show notes, but where would you recommend people find you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. I do try to use other social media, but one is enough, really. And I love connecting with people. I love hearing what people have to say. So I'm pretty responsive over there. So you can hop into my DMs or post a comment. I try and get back to everyone. I do have a website, which I update as often as I can. I put different journal articles up there, and you can also sign up to my newsletter, which is monthly. And so I kind of try and drop some little nuggets into that for whatever is happening that month, kind of move with the season, recipes, ideas, and recommendations. So that's a good place to get me. You can also email me directly too.
Brilliant. And what's your URL for your website?
It's just my name, which I appreciate is quite hard to spell. So it's www.doctors, that's DR, then Jenna, Jenna, and then Macciochi, which is MACCIOCHI.com.
Brilliant. And also you've got your 2 books, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah. So the first one is called Immunity, the Science of Staying Well. That came out in March 2020, just as we went into the first lockdown.
Very timely.
So it was written before COVID, and it's just about the science of staying well. So the science of our immune system and how it keeps us well. And it looks at a lot of different aspects of our lifestyle. And then the second one is your blueprint for strong immunity. And this was really helping people to find their own starting point, because we're all coming, at different places, and how to develop your own blueprint. So really kind of guiding people through different aspects of their health and how to make those sustainable changes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And I'll add all those into the show notes. And it just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you for joining me today, but also thank you for the work that you put out there, because it's been hugely kind of important for me on my journey, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.